This is the Fairphone Gen 6, and it's the first model by Fairphone that I think you could just hand to a regular person without any additional context, and they just think it's a nice phone that they actually liked using. Of course, the context, which you probably already know, is that Fairphone's goal for the last 12 years now has been to make phones that are as ethical and as long-lasting as possible. That means making their phones extremely repairable, using responsibly sourced and recycled materials, paying people in their supply chain higher wages on purpose, offering 8 years of software support including 7 Android versions, and also giving their phones a completely unheard of 5-year warranty. All of those have long been fantastic reasons to get a Fairphone if you're in one of the countries where they actually sell them, and with this new model they went even further by, for example, reducing their carbon emissions down to just 30 to 35 kilos per phone, which they told me is the lowest for any phone in the industry as far as they are able to tell. Historically, this focus on fairness always came with some trade-offs. The phones just felt a little bit more clumsy and had worse price-to-performance ratios. But with each generation, Fairphone was able to make those trade-offs less painful, and with the Gen 6, they finally got to a really good place. I've been testing the phone on and off for about a month now, including taking it on a family vacation where I relied on it to be my main camera, and I'm happy to say that apart from a few bugs, I actually liked using it a lot. This video was sponsored by my streaming service, Nebula. Starting with design, I know looks are subjective, but to me, this is easily the most handsome looking Fairphone to date. At 9.6mm, it has the same thickness as its predecessor, which is also a bit more rounded off, and it's also more than a millimeter or so thicker than most regular phones. But in every other dimension, Fairphone has made a lot of progress. The Gen 6 is noticeably smaller than its predecessor, and it slots in somewhere between an iPhone 16 Pro and the Pro Max, for example. But even more important is that Fairphone also managed to shave a whopping 19 grams off the phone with this generation, which now makes it not just lighter than previous Fairphones, but even lighter than most regular phones. I would still not call this a particularly sleek device, but the days when Fairphones were unnecessarily bulky and heavy are basically gone. Now, whenever I hear a big reduction in weight or size, I usually fear for the battery, but that has actually increased by about 5% versus its predecessor to 4,415 mAh. That's still not huge, but together with a smaller screen and a more power-efficient processor, I found that battery life was now actually pretty decent. When I was a couch potato and stayed at home all day, I got a very respectable 7+ hours of screen on time, while with more normal use, I could still get well above 4 hours every day. Certainly not record numbers, but easily enough to get most people through at least one day comfortably. Now, Fairphone achieved their impressive size and weight reductions by doing 3 main things. First, the metal frame is now gone, and instead we get an all-plastic construction. This does make the phone feel less premium, but I guess most Fairphone users will want to have a case on it for longevity anyway, so I don't think that is a big loss, especially since the phone still retains the same military standard durability rating. Second, obviously the screen itself got a little bit smaller, and so did the bezels around it. And third, Fairphone also made taking the phone apart just a little less easy. Now you actually need a screwdriver both to take off the backplate and then also to pop out the battery. Previously, you could do both with just your fingernails. Meanwhile, on the inside, a lot of the components also got just a little bit more tightly integrated. This allows, for example, for the battery to have less of a sturdy housing all around, since it doesn't have to survive clipping in and out constantly, which instead could be used to add more capacity, plus Fairphone could also make the connectors take up slightly less space too. Now, if you liked quickly swapping out batteries on the go, then this will be a step back for you, but I think for most people, having a bigger battery in a phone that is smaller and also lighter is probably worth the trade-off. The Fairphone, of course, still got a 10 out of 10 repairability rating from iFixit, and you can still replace just about every component in just a few minutes. You will just have to screw around a tiny bit longer. This includes each individual camera module, the display, the battery, the loudspeakers, the USB connector, and the various panels, all of which are available on Fairphone's own website for a completely reasonable price. Compare those to getting an iPhone fix, for example, in any major category, and it's a huge difference. Now, besides just being repairable, this year Fairphone also supports modular accessories for the first time ever. You can replace the bottom part of the backplate with a little loop for your finger, a card holder which can fit up to 3 cards, and also a little lanyard if you want to hang it around your shoulders. The cool thing is that you can even combine some of these with each other and even with the official case. The whole system reminds me quite a lot of the original CMF phone taken one step further, and I think people will really like these. The only thing that I don't like about this construction is that the volume buttons are way too easy to press, and because they're also just across the power button, I've taken multiple accidental screenshots every day with the phone. I'm not joking, multiple screenshots a day. I think I have like 70 of them accidentally on the phone by now. Anyway, moving on to the front of the device, the new Fairphone finally got a really nice screen update as well. It's a 6.3-inch 120Hz OLED panel that can get up to 800 nits in typical brightness and 1400 nits in peak brightness, plus it's also covered in Gorilla Glass 7i, all of which is to say that this is a very nice modern mid-range display. And because their refresh rates can now go down to just 10 Hz, Fairphone even managed to add back their always-on display with this generation, which many Fairphone users have yearned for. That said, their implementation is pretty poor for now. The display is pretty dim. Unlike competitors, it also doesn't seem to use the proximity sensor to notice when it could just turn off to save battery, and it also appears to stay on almost indefinitely, so I found that it drained close to 20% of my battery a day, so in the end I had to turn it off anyway. I hope there'll be a software update that brings smarter sleep-wake functionality to the always-on display, because otherwise the display is great. And the thing that you'll be looking at on those displays is Fairphone's version of basically stock Android with some very light tweaks. It's all very clean with close to zero pre-installed bloatware and just a slight touch of paint for the upgraded Fairphone branding. This was really pleasant, and their one big standout feature is called Fairphone Moments. This is a special mode that is triggered by using the little yellow slider on the side. It automatically turns on Do Not Disturb, so you stop getting notifications, and it also limits you to using a maximum of 5 apps. You can create multiple presets, like how I have one for Essentials, Work, and Bedtime, for example, and you can customize each. You can think of these as multiple Do Not Disturb profiles, and I think some people will like having this option instead of having to commit to buying a whole new minimalist phone. Now, while that is nice, I do have two things to nitpick with Moments. See, with Android, you have something called a launcher. This is basically your home environment which houses your apps, your widgets, etc. Android actually allows you to switch launchers, like I've done here with the popular Niagara launcher, for example. Now my home screen looks completely different. Obviously, Fairphone Moments very much looks like a launcher, but it doesn't actually behave like one. It behaves more like an overlay on top of your launcher. When you swipe to go home, Android first draws your launcher for a second, and then it quickly puts the Fairphone Moments UI over that. That is a bit distracting for a feature that is supposed to make you more relaxed. For what it's worth, I actually had a call with Fairphone and they explicitly said that they're working on improvements for Moments, but I don't know when those are coming and if they'll be any good. But meanwhile, my second gripe is that I also asked them if Moments was coming to older Fairphone devices as well, and they gave me an answer I'm not too happy about.
Actually, Fairphone Moments is designed in a way to be deeply integrated, so that's why we have the switch as well, right? So we like the tangibility of the switch and what that gives, like that layer that brings on top of the software layer. So from that perspective, that's not a function that we will so easily, or we could so easily bring to Fairphone 5 in this case, and it's indeed not the intention to do so.
Sure, I get that the hardware switch is cool and unique to this phone, but I also think you could just put a software toggle, for example, in quick settings, and that would do the trick too, so I hope they change their minds. Anyway, Moments is pretty cool, and I also like that Fairphone lets you reassign that switch to other things if you don't like it. So, for example, Do Not Disturb, Flight Mode, and so on, and I think all of that makes sense. Now, with Fairphones in the past, performance was always one of the main things that actually kept me from being fully on board. But this year, I'm happy to say that that is mostly not an issue now either. The specs on this phone include a Snapdragon 7S Gen 3, 8GB of RAM, and UFS 3.1 memory, which for the first time makes this a Fairphone with completely normal mid-range components. No outdated memory, no weird IoT chip like in the last generation, etc. The synthetic benchmarks show modest improvements in CPU versus last gen and significantly bigger ones for the GPU, and once you add the higher refresh rate screen plus the much faster storage, you end up with a phone that actually feels noticeably more responsive in day-to-day use. Now, I've heard from my studio mate Kilian that phones like the Nothing Phone 3, for example, which have basically the same specs, still feel more polished. That might be true, but as a person who doesn't test like 50 phones a year, everything felt nice and smooth to me, and my only real problem with performance was actually a bug. Infuriatingly, I don't know what actually triggers this bug. It happened to me all the time in the past. It hasn't happened in the last couple of days. I don't know what happened in the middle. I did not get a software update, so I can't actually capture it on camera right now because I just can't reproduce it, and I'll just have to describe it to you. Imagine that every now and then the phone just basically randomly comes to a crawl for like a solid minute and becomes extremely choppy. Frame rates drop to like 10 Hz or something, and then the phone suddenly magically recovers. Fairphone explicitly acknowledged this bug both in their forum and in my interview with them. They said that they're working on a fix, but again, I don't know if and when that is coming. Anyway, and before we move on from the specs, I also wanted to point out that the phone comes with 256 gigs of storage by default, and that it also supports micro SD cards, so you won't run out of storage either. Given that this phone is supposedly all about longevity, the fact that they're not even offering you a bad memory version that you might regret a couple years down the line is probably a good choice. Okay, and the last big chunk that we have to talk about is, of course, the cameras. And here too, I think most people will find things to be satisfactory. To be clear, these are not iPhone or Pixel level cameras for sure, but for the main camera, Fairphone used a 50 megapixel sensor called the Sony Leitia 700C, which is a completely respectable mid-range sensor, and beside that, there's also a 13 megapixel ultra-wide shooter, and for the most part, I thought the results were fine. You get reasonably contrasty images, dynamic range is fine, and colors are mostly good too. If you sent these pictures in a group chat or posted them on social media, you would blend right in with most modern phones. Also, while I don't love that the ultra-wide often gives you wildly different colors than the main camera in basically the same scene, those images look mostly fine too, and I really like that the ultra-wide actually acts as a pretty decent macro camera. The results there are surprisingly solid. That said, I have found a few odd things with this phone, especially when trying to zoom, which on this phone of course you can only do digitally. As an example, here's a photo with 3x digital zoom. It's not great, but fine. And then here is another one taken right after. From one moment to the next with the same settings, the camera went from kind of okay to an over-sharpened mess. Here's another example of that at around 4 times the zoom or so, and now this photo was taken with the same settings a few seconds later, which again is a complete mess. I don't know what triggers this mode, I guess, but it randomly kicks in every now and then and it completely ruins some shots. Clearly this too seems to be a bug that I guess could be fixed with time, but yeah, it's not pretty. Anyway, I also compared the new model with its predecessor, and while that mostly went well, I actually found some odd results too. Overall, the new phone usually produced better images and especially handled dynamic range significantly better. The older 5 often let highlights get blown out, while the Gen 6 almost never did, which is a big upgrade. Also in low light you can see significantly better processing and less noise. That said, I somewhat regularly actually preferred the colors of the 5. This was especially the case with food, where the brighter, more saturated images actually looked way more appetizing, and it was also true in a few landscape shots. Just look at that sky, it looks way better. Now, a clear win for the 6 came from its selfie camera, which is universally better than its predecessor. The images now look much better, while the 5 routinely gave me really weirdly desaturated photos that made me look sickly. I'm really happy that they finally fixed that. And to wrap things up with the camera, let's talk about videos, which are basically fine but not amazing. You can only go up to 4K 30, but for the most part everything looks decent, especially in good light. That said, I occasionally manage to get the camera to blow out a couple of highlights, like on this swan here, and I don't think this is a strong suit of the phone in general. Now in closing, I gotta say that I might have been especially nitpicky with this phone and wanted to highlight every issue that I had so people actually knew what they're getting themselves into. That said, I overall really enjoyed using this phone day to day, and all my problems with it are things that Fairphone could theoretically fix with software updates. Meanwhile, all the hardware choices like the more compact body, the fantastic repairability, the nice 120Hz screen, and the quirky modules, all of those add up to a device that is actually really solid. Now you might be wondering when those updates are actually planned, why Fairphone, for example, didn't use a flagship chip in this phone, why they aren't selling outside of Europe for the most part, etc. And all of those are questions that I've asked the company itself directly in an interview for this video. That 30-minute interview answering all of your questions is available as bonus content exclusively to Nebula subscribers. I've made dozens of bonus videos like these for people who subscribe to Nebula, which lets you dive much deeper into many of my topics, but the platform has lately doubled it down even more on really high-end videos that we call Nebula Originals. These are big, ambitious projects where Nebula funding lets creators really flex their muscles. For example, with 17 Pages, one of my favorite creators, Bobby Broccoli, not only got to make a massive and incredibly well-produced documentary, Nebula even built a custom streaming feature for it that actually enables the twist of the show. I won't tell you what the twist is because that would of course ruin the fun, but I'm pretty sure that you've never seen anything like it. 17 Pages is a fantastic documentary that unpacks a scientific mystery over alleged fraud that got so out of hand it even included the Secret Service, Nobel laureates risking their careers, and more. Nebula is our very own streaming platform where thoughtful creators come together to bring our most dedicated viewers more and better videos in exchange for them supporting our businesses and financing the creation of our most ambitious projects. Our business model is refreshingly simple. You support us directly with a subscription, and we in exchange give you more and better stuff to watch with no ads, no trackers, nothing. nothing shady. Better yet, with my link go.nebula.tv/TechAltar, which is also linked in the description, you can also get a big discount, which brings the price of Nebula down to just $36 a year instead of the usual $60 that you'd get when signing up with a generic link. That is just $3 a month and a pretty big discount, so be sure to use my link go.nebula.tv/TechAltar or scan the QR code on screen to sign up. And if you hate ongoing subscriptions, there's even a lifetime option using that link. And once you have a subscription, you can even share that with a friend using our guest passes feature, so you can actually watch your favorite shows with them. Nice! So check out the links in the description, and I'll see you in the next video.